Hello again, friends, and you are our friends, and Happy New Year! A new episode of Jim Cornette's Drive-Thru right here for you to pull up to wherever you are, whatever day it is, whatever time it is. Maybe you're on your commute to work, maybe you're at home, maybe you're in your office, maybe, who knows, but I am the great Brian Last.
Maybe you're having a menage a trois in an alleyway somewhere.
In an alleyway?
Who knows where you could possibly be?
If you could have a three-way, you want to be somewhere other. I mean, an alleyway?
Well, I didn't say.
How's that going to work?
I didn't say you picked the location. It's just where the fucking thing developed. We've all been there, right?
Not in an alleyway, but we'll find out where else Jim Cornette has been on today's episode of the Drive-Thru. I am the great Brian Last. I'll be asking your questions to this man. The show only gets better from here, Mr. Jim Cornette.
It certainly can't go the other direction. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and Happy New Year, everybody. Holy jumping shitballs. Woohoo! Woo! Mercy, baby. It's 2020, and Brian Last, you need energy, baby. You need energy. You know what energy is, what our handsome Jimmy is saying to you, boy, from New York City. You need some energy. ENERGYG. Daddy mama. Boogie child.
Yeah.
Woo, mercy. But anyway, no, yeah, you were just lamenting. And the reason why I cracked up as soon as you began speaking and tried to project otherwise, you were just lamenting over the airwaves to me before we went on the air. We were personal. It was in our personal time and space that we have before we go on for the public, that you were so puny and so sickish and so dry, and your voice and your feeling and your head, and it was the dryness. It was just the dryness, like you'd been sandpapered, like you'd been taken on a wagon train with Ward Bond and crossed the plains and the Dust Bowl and the dryness and the desert and the heat and the humidity. I guess they don't have humidity in the desert. It's not the heat, it's the humidity. But it's the heat in the desert and the sands of time and Iwo Jima and all those type of things that just dried you out over the holiday season here. And you don't have the perkiness that I have and that I possess here as we enter a new year of exciting programming.
I have a stuffy nose and a dry throat, and that's how the West was won.
How did they treat those things back in the old? Remember, it was like back in the old days in the Old West, the town doctor was also the notary, the mortician, and the barber. So if you came in with fucking pneumonia or pleurisy or something, they'd give you a haircut and notarize your fucking mortgage and send you on your way.
What about tooth pain? What did they do about tooth pain back in the ancient days?
Well, though they had boy, I'll tell you what, you want to watch the Learning Channel every once in a while, Brian Last, you learn something. The Learning Channel or the Discovery Channel or the History Channel or all these channels in between the fucking reality shows that bear no semblance to reality. The documentary pieces is what I'm saying. Not did ancient aliens perform dental surgery, but the real legitimate dental tools of one form or another have been around for centuries.
Well, I know that.
And I didn't want to be on the fucking the receiving end, the business end of any of them from what I've seen. I think they just took a fucking hammer and chisel and drilled that bad boy out of there, with a couple of good hard shots with the ball peen hammer.
Oof. The Mike Lano treatment.
That's why I don't. Damn it, took us. Yeah, it was a depth charge. That's why, fuck these people who I long for the good old days of 20, 30 years ago when wrestling made sense. I don't long for the good old days of fucking 200 years ago and the pioneer spirit and all that shit when they were fucking performing complicated dental procedures with a ball peen hammer and curing fucking, cancer, which they didn't know existed, with leeches. And, oftentimes fucking dancing for rain back in those days. So, and burning witches at the stake.
Well, 30-something years ago, you would have fallen off that scaffold and immediately got an ACL reconstructive surgery, and you would have been back in 6 months as opposed to whatever it was, a few weeks, and you were back. No surgery.
Well, no, I wouldn't have got the goddamn surgery because I'd have still been out for 6 fucking months. No, I would never have gotten that surgery. I didn't want to fucking be out for 6 fucking months. As long as I was ambulatory, I was coming back in 2 fucking weeks.
What do you think when you see all the guys today that get injured? And look, the injuries are legitimate, obviously, and the style has certainly changed in the ring, but they get injured, they get these surgeries, and they're gone for long periods of time. There are a lot of guys getting arthroscopic knee surgery at different points, and they would bounce back pretty quickly. Tommy Rich, Ernie Ladd. That's something considering Ernie Ladd's knees and the condition they were in. But what about in the territorial days if guys got injured and had modern surgery and the way things are now and they had to sit out for a year? How would they have survived?
Well, but no, see, it's several different animals here, and you've just completely disrupted the flow of the program where now we're actually going to have to be serious. It's several different issues. If I had been a wrestler, it would have been much harder for me to not have the ACL reconstruction and actually done that whole surgery, et cetera. But I didn't need to wrestle primarily. I was a manager, so I could get by with it. Now, Darso, Crusher Khrushchev, his knee injury that he had earlier in '86 was even worse than mine off the scaffold. Because we had the same doctor, and he said that it looked like a hand grenade went off in the middle of Darso's knee. He just tore everything, the ACL, maybe even the PCL, but all the cartilage was just blah. And he was a wrestler, and he had a body weight of 280 pounds. So he had to bite the bullet and have the surgery, have everything fixed. And he was out for, 8-10 months, whatever it was. Now, having said that, with the modern surgeries now, I could have had the surgery has actually gotten better. The reason why the guys are out longer is the WWE holds guys out till they absolutely legitimately ought to return to a professional sport, no doubt about it. Whereas in the old days, you stayed out as long as until you could come back and work around it. Because, everybody in those days worked around shit. And it was easier to do because people weren't crazy back then. But anyway, now I could have had the ACL reattachment and not been out too much longer from what I had to do than I was just having it scoped. But the reason why you hear these recovery times are longer is not only because the WWE is definitely going to keep people out as long as they're supposed to, whereas I said 30 years ago or whatever, hey, watch the arm. Right? I just had shoulder surgery. Watch the arm or whatever the fuck. And guys worked around it. You can't do that now. Even the guys that are out on the independents, you can't work around shit anymore the way these guys work. So it's not that the surgery has gone backwards and takes longer. It's just that now it takes longer, not only because you really always should have, but also because there's more pressure, especially the guys that blow these major joints are the guys that are doing the flying shit that puts all the pressure on those joints. So you definitely need to make sure you're ready.
If you were
and more guys have contracts now that can afford to do that, but some guys still can't really afford to do it, but they have to do it.
If you were a young man today, do you think you would go for the LASIK surgery?
That's your fucking eyes.
That's right.
Well, what does that have to do with what we were talking about? Nobody gets fucking knocked nearsighted in a wrestling match.
It's a separate topic about surgeries that weren't really around in 1986 or 1989.
No, just like I'm not getting it now. Nobody's fucking with my fucking eyeballs. Thank you. I'll take my balls and go home. I don't even like to get my eyes examined and they're all up in my fucking face and peering in, blowing air and shit and everything. I cannot take eye drops. I can't open my eyes underwater. I don't want any intrusion of any substance. And people literally make me physically ill, like I would puke Bobby Eaton style, to look at people putting contact lenses in and touching their eyeball with their fucking finger.
You can't open your eyes underwater?
Oh, God, no. Well, I'll close them again real quick. It takes, if they have to give me eye drops, it takes people to hold my face open. I can't do it if I know it's coming. Fuck that. Nobody's fucking with my eyeballs. Fuck you for thinking about it, you fucking dry-ass motherfucker.
Well, there's a lot of people out there, they get this LASIK surgery, and it usually goes well, but there's some people where there is some sort of disaster, and they either have constant pain or their eyes hurt, and it's a sad day if they don't have a good attorney on their back.
Well, it certainly is, and if we were there yet, I'd agree with you, but since we're not... Oh, golly, I got to make mention, first of all, thank you, folks, for the holiday break. As you can tell, I'm chipper. Thank you for the holiday break at JimCornette.com and Cornette's Collectibles. But we are backfilling orders, everything from our cutoff date of December 21st through actually Sunday, January 5th. It either went out on Friday, this past Friday, January 3rd, or it's going out on Monday, January 6th. Most of you gave me a break. I appreciate it. I love all of you that have had patience while I sent this stuff out. But anyway, we're back in working order, and T-shirts are restocked. Burger Towel's going to be back up in a couple of weeks. But everything through the holiday season that was ordered before December 20th, which was our cutoff date, should have been delivered by now. We had about, I think, maybe 8 or 10 packages out of almost 2,000 different ones that we sent out during that 10-week period that were lost, and we have heard about and are in the process of replacing. And then there's a couple of people, Brian, if you order something through the mail, and when you put your street address down, do you put down both the number and the name of the street?
Of course.
A lot of people do that. Some people do not. I've written these people. I haven't heard back. I think it's a infrequently used email account they ordered from. But basically, if you ordered from me and you gave me your street number, but not the name of the actual street, just the fucking street number, like 1642 and a town, I need more information. If you did the opposite and just said Main Street, New York, but not a number, I need more information. And a couple of you out there, what apartment number is it? The post office would like to talk to you and get more information about that. So anyway, we're working on all that stuff. But almost everybody's got everything well in hand. And thank you guys for the break and the record 2019. And now we're just chipper and ready to go, refreshed, brains wrung out. Brian, you feel like you've had your brain wrung out, don't you?
It's getting drier by the second.
And also this coming week, a brand new Jim Cornette experience, the first of 2020. We're going to talk about all the stupid, goofy shit that's gone on over the past couple weeks. What a show. What a crowd. And also over the next couple weeks, guests on the program are going to include the fantastic Bobby Fulton himself about his big event coming up in Ohio in March, and Dr. Tom Pritchard about his phenomenal wrestling training program he's got going on down in Knoxville. And, I just wish that I could come up with a name of someone who could come on the Jim Cornette experience in the next week or two and talk intelligently about the federal lawsuit that we have fired to shut some outlaw mud show bullshit down. Did I say fired? I mean filed. We filed a federal lawsuit. Actually, we fired it off, too. It was a shot across the bow. This fired federal lawsuit that's going to shut some outlaw mud show shit down has been fired and filed. It may go all the way to Bezos. We don't know. But some people have been infringing and impinging on some things, some of my things, and I don't like having my things impinged and infringed upon. If you're going to deal with my things, you do it with my permission, and you do it in a loving and compassionate way. You do not roughly impinge and infringe upon my things, or elsewise you will get down upon you the wrath of who?
Call Stephen P. News. If you need to sue. An outlaw show or two. Those are the rest.
Now that's a segue, ladies and gentlemen, and what's more, that's an attorney. That's somebody who will fight for your rights as he's fighting for mine. And Brian, sometimes I think we get almost too hyperbolic about the glorious attributes that Stephen possesses, and we should remember sometimes the little things, the small things that he does, the quiet things that he does, the things he does for charity and the goodness of people that we don't talk about enough. He helped feed the hungry over the holidays. He's helped the opioid addicted babies. He's helped a variety of folks in the state of West Virginia that were downtrodden upon. But he also will uphold your right to go about your daily life in the United States of America, outlaw mud show, asshole free. And we're going to talk more about that in the weeks to come on the Jim Cornette Experience. But folks, newlawoffice.com, 888-692-8084 is the way that you contact our consigliere, the man who will rectify the rights, or rectify the right. I guess if you rectify a right, do you make it wrong?
Technically, I guess I haven't thought of it.
Because you would be making a right. Well, if anybody can make a right even righter, it's Stephen P. New. So all I'm saying, folks, is I don't want to cast aspersions on anybody, because Stephen P. New is a charitable man and he's a compassionate man for an attorney. He shows compassion on your side, but not theirs. But he will help any schlub off the street because he's that kind of guy, and he genuinely is concerned about people. But if you mention that you're a member of the cult of Cornette, I mean, let's just call a spade here, and let's face it, you're going to get preferential treatment because you're in the club. We're all part of the club. And if you want an attorney, a nationally known attorney who has gotten millions of dollars in judgments for people who have been downtrodden upon, if you want a guy like that on your side and be part of the club, call Stephen P. New, is all I have to say. 888-692-8084.
We still hear from members of the cult who didn't think Stephen was a real guy. They thought he was one of your characters until they called up and they got a T-shirt, or they got some legal advice, or they got some help.
Or they got some money. He's almost too good to be true, but you take these things, these cherry blossoms that life gives you every once in a while when you can. A man who's too good to be true and fights for the rights of all of you. That man is Stephen P. New, and New Law Office is for you.
Well, let's see if these questions are for you this week, Jim. The first batch of 2020 or 2020, however we want to put it. This first question was
now that is going to be a source of fucking issue here, because 2020 is going to call everybody's attention to the fucking news magazine program on ABC, or your potentially perfect eyesight. 2020 is going to have to be what we call it until it gets to 2021, because there's never been 2021 eyesight or a news magazine titled 2021, but we're going to have to do 2020.
All right, you Downs, let's see how you deal with this first question.
And thank you, Baba Wawa.
This was sent in. This is 2020. This was sent in to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com. I'm guessing this may not be a real name. Jack Mayoff in Balzac, Virginia.
Balzac, Virginia. I've been there before. I think we ran the high school.
Several people have sent in this question. What are your thoughts on the Lana Lashley wedding segment? Do you think these comedy segments should be given so much attention on the primary wrestling show on television?
Well, this has happened since we've had the break, right? I guess because you would have already imagined I didn't see this, and you're correct. I didn't see it because I didn't know it. One of our homework over the holidays was watching Raw, but I heard everybody hated it and it stunk. But I don't. What exactly did they do? I don't even know.
I didn't watch the whole thing, and I haven't kept up with the whole Lana Lashley Rusev angle because it was
so now that we both established our preeminent knowledge on this subject, we're going to go ahead and comment on it.
One of the main reasons I wanted to dissuade you from doing Raw reviews was I didn't want to have anything to do with this crap that they're putting out there on TV. But during the wedding segment, I did see part of that. And I guess what happened was, of course, in traditional wrestling fashion, right before the vows, something crazy has to happen. Liv Morgan, who they had been doing these vignette videos for that they were repackaging, she walks out and says how the whole thing is bullshit. And everyone thinks she's talking about the fact that Lashley is getting married because they're thinking maybe she's saying that she was having a thing with Lashley. And in fact, it's the opposite. Paul Heyman style swerve. She's been having an affair with Lana, and she can't believe that Lana is going to marry Lashley. And then she gets in the ring and she starts fighting Lana, and then Rusev jumps out of a cake. The opposite usually.
So wait a minute, the guy didn't get the cake in the face. He came out of the cake.
He came out of the cake. He came out of the cake. And then they.
Well, anybody that comes out of a cake gets over. We know this much.
Well, I don't know. They may have tested that theory on the show this week, but I think the whole thing is such a waste of Rusev. He's such a talent. I think Lana, when used correctly, is a real talent. Lashley, I can go either way on, but this is exactly the kind of thing that makes me not want to pay any attention to modern wrestling. Is crap like this.
Well, and here's another. It's completely unfucking believable. Liv Tyler comes out, or is
Liv
that
Morgan?
Liv Morgan. Okay, Liv Tyler is the very attractive daughter of Steven Tyler. Liv Morgan comes out and tells Lana they've been having an affair and springs this on Lashley. Like anybody's going to believe that anybody could possibly have an affair in the wrestling business and anybody not know about it. That's ridiculous. That's completely unbelievable. It exposes the business that anybody would be fucking around and everybody in the wrestling business not know about it.
What was the first big affair that you remember going around the locker room, everyone talking about?
Oh God.
I mean, there weren't a lot of women used as valets on the roster until you got to World Class, I guess, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, they were always part of a couple. I mean, Miss Linda and Adrian. But I guess probably the Chris Adams, Billy Jack, Miss Jeannie. I forgot all the twists and turns in that saga, but that may have been the first one. And that's right. You know, as we had I just got into business and we were just headed toward Louisiana when they were doing that in Texas and blah, blah, blah. That may have been the end, but there's been more drama in that direction over the last 20 years than ever before. And it used to be discouraged for guys to even bring their wives or girlfriends to the matches for several reasons. Number one, because then you had to keep constant eye on them because the people would fuck with them, whether, you know, got physically or just yelling at them or throwing shit at them or on them or whatever. That legitimately happened. If the fans knew that somebody came in with the heels and those people were out in the crowd or in the women's bathroom or whatever the fuck, they were fair game. But secondly, you didn't want the wives and girlfriends on the road or at the matches to meet all the other wives and girlfriends, in quotation marks, that were on the road and at the matches. And so you try to, and then, you know, like, Precious was considered one of the boys because she was with Gorgeous Jimmy, but she knew what was going on, and she did not. She was in the same social circle as the boys, not as the wives and girlfriends. If you brought your wife and girlfriend as part of the gimmick, part of your gimmick, you brought them into the world of the boys and that social circle, and they pretty much knew that if they spilled beans to the wives and girlfriends social circle, that their husband would probably be fucking dropped on his head somewhere in the fucking locker room. So it was a different, you know, but then every once in a while, and you'd have, Tatum and then Eddie with Missy. And you would have some of these things flare up every once in a while, but it was highly discouraged to, and now I guess they want the men and women on the roster to date each other. I've heard, because apparently so many of them do and get married, etc. They are encouraging that, whereas before it was always if you had if you had a girl in a territory and she was not with a dedicated husband, but just kind of floating around, it was going to be trouble sooner or later.
I recently had a discussion with Howard Baum while we're recording the 605 Super Podcast. It was an off-air talk, and I'm going to speak in some vagueness here, but you'll know exactly what I'm talking about.
Vagosity.
He was mentioning how there's a book that came out in the last few years, and the opening chapter was this salacious story of Christine Jarrett finding two wrestlers in a van with some women when they were supposed to be in the ring. And how it's a great story. And he brought it up to one of the fabulous wrestlers who potentially was involved here. And the guy smiled a little bit, but then just said, no, I love my wife. I was with my wife. My wife.
Who was standing next to him apparently at the time, probably. Yes, because one of those relationships was a very long-term one. Yes. And another one of those was persons in that fabulous tag team was just free as the bird for all those years. And now I'm not talking about Hayes and Gordy either. I'm just saying he was unattached and single, and probably I'm sure some of his reputation meandered off on the other guy.
Was Sam Houston and Baby Doll always out in the open, or was there a period of time where they weren't? Were they too open? I guess maybe.
I mean, I don't think it had been going on a real long time before, it was obvious. But once again, they were baby faces, and we didn't travel in the same social circles, obviously, because of that. And we never rode together because of that. And we're not in a lot of the same locker rooms because of that. But the way I knew it became an issue suddenly was on Crockett's plane when it was obvious that something was going on other than, people just riding to the fucking show, which is what got them all the heat to begin with. But that was a situation where basically Sam Houston got penalized because he was an underneath guy at the time and she was being used on top. So he got penalized just, because of that situation, because he was a real good worker. He was just painfully thin, but holy shit, if he hadn't had his other issues, he would have probably filled out and gotten bigger and still been a tremendous worker. But in this case, it's because he was lucky to kind of be on the plane to begin with. And now all of a sudden they're putting on what do the kids call it? The PDA on the plane while we're all trying to fucking, watch the volunteer jam video for the fucking 11,000th time and ignore them. So they kicked Houston off the plane.
Dark Journey got involved in the business as Dick Slater's girlfriend. And then after Slater left the UWF, she stayed. And then eventually she got absorbed.
There was a lot of female trouble in the Mid-South area between 1985 and 1988, wasn't there?
There certainly was. And then she got absorbed in the Crockett Promotions. And then she was gone pretty quickly. Was she actually seeing anyone or fooling around with anyone in Crockett? Or it was just such a weird thing that she ended up there because she did nothing else in wrestling after that. She only got involved as the girlfriend of a wrestler and then hung around that territory for a while. Any story to why she was in Crockett or what she was doing there?
No, I saw Dark Journey in Charlotte at the Fan Fest this past year, and I'd seen her once before in New Orleans a few years ago. So a couple of times in the last 30 years. So I'm not. I appreciate your respect for my knowledge of wrestling history, but I'm not sure I can qualify on a expert rundown of Dark Journey's career. But I think probably it was a mutual thing. A reason why she got out of the business is just they had absorbed the UWF and they'd taken her on. She had been on TV for a couple years, had a name. I don't know at that point how dedicated she really was to continuing in the wrestling business. And I think probably when they decided to stop using her, which happened with a lot of the UWF talent, male or female, she could have got booked in a variety of other places, maybe not as high profile, but if she wanted to stay in the business come hell or high water at that point, she could have got booked in a number of places. And I think she went on to do something else. But yes, originally she was Slater's girlfriend. And then That as far as whether she was messing around with anybody or not, I don't know. I would, as Dennis Connery used to say, it wasn't my week to watch them, right? I didn't see the dick in the pussy, as he would say, Bill Cosby-ish, like the dick in the pussy. So I have no idea about that. But I think that the most famous story about Sting taking the brunt of Slater's displeasure over him giving her a ride after she and Slater broke up, that's the thing. Sting was just giving her a fucking ride. I don't think there was anything going on, and he ended up getting his head stuck in the fucking toilet by Slater for it. I think he was just trying to be a nice guy. I don't know. I have no idea.
Back to the initial question about the wedding. I guess the first really prominent ones in wrestling were the Butcher of Vashon one on TNT and the Uncle Elmer one on Saturday night's main event. Are there any weddings in wrestling that you've actually liked? Do you like it at all being used on a wrestling show?
Well, I mean, they did them in the 40s and 50s. I mean, there's evidence going back that far. So and so will get married in the ring after the match. It was before television. It's been done as an attraction, and they didn't become giant angles and the big fucking hoo-ha. That didn't happen until the modern era with Jerry Springer and all that bullshit. It's so clownish. It's just always so clownish, and it brings out the worst in the boys and the writers that all want to do some kind of goddamn Monty Python movie that will be glorified as fucking brilliant satire and comedy forevermore. So it's just so fucking goofy. If you really actually did it and did a straight wedding and with no angle, but just to establish the wife as somebody that we halfway give a shit about, and then used her 3 months down the road, gave her a fucking pile driver and paralyzed her when she was pregnant or whatever, to really get some fucking heat, I'd love that. But it just always degenerates into fucking cake throwing and play fighting.
And you would be certainly against cake throwing.
Yes, these cakes can be dangerous. I got juice for the fucking Louisiana cake. I told you that, right?
I remember seeing it. I don't remember you telling me the story.
Well, I didn't realize then I'd only done the cake the once, and it just happened to be that I was able to get a store-bought ready-made cake, right, of the kind that I wanted, because I wasn't going to go goddamn order of custom-made. I just went and got a big birthday cake, right? Well, when I went to get the big birthday cake in Louisiana, the only one they had was the giant sheet cake. Well, that looks good. People will be able to see it, and I can just write the shit on it, whatever the fuck. But I didn't realize until I was headed toward it, that fucking sheet cake wasn't that thick, and there was a table underneath. So I actually did get a bloody nose, but you couldn't tell because of all the different colored icing. But in the Mid-South Wrestling cake with the Rock and Roll Express, they took me all the way to the table. I came out with a bloody nose out of that.
Did you buy every other cake that you were pushed into?
Yes. And all no, well, the one we did in Atlanta at the studio, I obviously didn't bring that down on the plane with me. I'm going to say that I'd made arrangements maybe with somebody like, Charlie McGowan or somebody or whatever to have a cake. But no, it was a point where I almost fucking hyperventilated the night before the Mid-South angle, blowing up all those party balloons. Back in those days, whether it was Memphis TV or Mid-South or even Crockett, Atlanta TV, whatever, if you did something like that required props, it's either because the booker told you, hey, we're going to have a party for a fucking dog, or a party because you won the U.S. tag title or whatever this weekend on TV, so bring some shit. Or you had the idea to do something that would require some props, and you went out and you brought them yourself. There was not a goddamn time we ever got supplied with any fucking thing in any deal I ever did, except, like I said, if it was something where we were flying in and I had to make arrangements to get a cake or whatever. But no, all that shit was what we came up with based on what we were told we were going to do. I started that in Memphis. We're going to have a fucking party. We're going to have balloons. We're going to have confetti, noisemakers. Whatever the fuck. It's my goddamn segment. I wanted to get over. We're going to do this thing right.
I remember Eddie Gilbert talking about when they did the angle in Mid-South where he had the portrait made. That eventually was stolen by the Bruise Brothers, and then they broke it over his head.
Yeah.
But he actually had to go out and get it made. Like, it wasn't like supplied to him. He had to go out and get the photo. He had to go out and get it professionally done. He was responsible for every part of that angle.
Yeah, that's why I love to go to Spencer's Gifts and gimmick shops to get little props and stupid things that I could fucking make fun of people with or whatever. But in some cases, with a bigger presentation like that, you spent a little bit of money to get the fucking point, or bought a suit to have it ripped off, or fucking, buy a trophy to have it broken, or whatever. That's what you did to get your shit over.
Our next question, Jim, was sent in on Twitter using the hashtag CornyDriveThru from Pete Boyle. What are Jim's thoughts on Hulk Hogan possibly returning to the ring for a WrestleMania match?
Well, I mean, on the surface of it, besides the fact that it's, at his age and with his injuries, it's obviously going to require a lot of smoke and mirrors. Yes. Why? If they could still get some kind of, I won't say mixed tag, but, tag team match that had a personal issue where somebody else could do the work and be a lot of the smoke and mirrors, and Hogan could do whatever it is that he can do physically at this point and participate, and you could cover it up. I don't know why they wouldn't want Hulk Hogan to be at WrestleMania one more time. It's just that, boy, that's a job that requires planning like one of those heist movies at this point. He couldn't drop the leg anymore, can he?
I don't think so. He's had his hip done. I think he has back problems. How would you do it? I mean, if you had to have smoke and mirrors, what would be the optimum way to use Hulk Hogan?
That's why it would have to be a personal issue, because it'd have to be a fight. And he probably needs to fucking get a little juice and stand up and throw punches and then stagger and fucking sell into the ropes and then roll out on the floor and rattle some furniture around. And maybe if it's a tag match of some kind, maybe he is blinded with some substance, after he shines for a minute or two to get heat on the other fucking guy, the partner, whoever it may be, so that then he could clear his vision and make a standing up comeback with punches and shoot the guy in, and they could fucking Big Daddy off of him. Alan Blackstock will get a kick out of that one. Yeah, I mean, you as long as a fucking human being, we had matches with Ron Wright in Smoky Mountain when he had an artificial hip and was in his 70s at that point, early 70s, I guess. As long as somebody is ambulatory, you can do something. The question is whether you can get enough talent to surround him, and with the reason for people to already want to see it. Because his match we had with fucking Vince McMahon was not a goddamn pretty sight, was it? That was years ago, but still, right?
It was a spectacle, yeah.
It's a spectacle, and if people want to like it because they want to see the heel get his ass kicked, and it's put together well enough, and he just realizes what he can do and what he can't do beforehand. If they put together shit that when he gets out there and he can't do it, then it sucks. But if they realize what needs to be done or not done beforehand and just do that, then yeah, it would probably still get over.
In general, I know Ric Flair had his retirement match with Shawn Michaels, which he quickly unretired from, and Terry Funk had his great one in 1983, which was so dramatic, and then he quickly unretired from that. But more than likely, if Hulk Hogan has one last match, it'll probably be his last match for all the reasons we just laid out. Are you for a guy like that, a guy of that caliber who was that big a star, having a big goodbye match, a big, leaving, he could smile and wave to everyone and kiss everyone goodbye, as opposed to just, their last match happened. Like Steve Austin, he had a last match. No one knew it was the last match except maybe him. And then he just never came back. How do you want a guy like that at that level, like an Austin, Hogan, before that Bruno Sammartino, different guys that are at that level of star? Should they have one big last match for people to celebrate him? And should they go over?
Well, yeah, they should have the last match within reason. Caveat here, say yes, it's always better to draw a big gate and a big house and celebrate a guy, and it's a feel-good moment for a star of that magnitude that you don't get often, and everybody would remember it. And did I mention also it's a big gate? I'm always about, what would sell tickets and have it just be a huge event, right? So, yes, I think you should always have that when you can. I wish Steve Austin have had that, but at the same time, it depends also on the individual as far as what expectation that they've built up in the fans' minds of how good they are. I don't see any reason in the world why, but I wasn't his fucking doctor. But could Steve Austin back, 17 years ago or whatever, have had one more Steve Austin match on a big show? Probably. Can he do it now? I don't know. It seems like if he felt like he could have, he would have done it. But if it's not that important to him, ultimately, I think it's always, yes, you should always have a big final match if you can still be that guy one more time. Because I just hate to leave the tickets unsold, money laying on the ground, not create a moment like that. But if the guy in question feels like that he can't do it, or the deal is just not right at that point for him to do it, and it just never came around, then I can understand that too. Should they go over? Once again, depends on the guy and the situation. Right now, yes, Hulk Hogan should go over because he can absolutely not make a star by getting beat.
He could absolutely not make a star by getting. I mean, that's an interesting way you put that.
He could absolutely not make anybody a star right now by getting beat, because it wouldn't be a good match. They wouldn't be beating Hulk Hogan. They would be winning a gimmick match. And it would just leave a sour taste in people's mouth if that was the last one. If you had a guy, maybe a guy that had been a great worker, but primarily a heel, like a ravishing Rick Rude, if he'd have been around long enough, you might have wanted him to put over a guy on the way out. And if he was a guy that Rick Rude liked, he probably would have wanted to also. But when a guy gets icon status, you want them to win their last match. You just don't want them to beat somebody they got no business fucking beating. But it's like when the Undertaker streak was ended. It didn't help Brock, and I think it just hurt. The streak was just cool. I just everybody liked the streak. They shouldn't have broke the streak. Streak was cool. And they broke it with a guy that he didn't get more over because of it. It just kind of left people going, eh. But it always depends on the person, the personality, and the situation.
Well, naturally, several AEW questions have come in, so let's ask a few of these real quick.
Oh, naturally.
People like your takes on AEW. Some people hate your takes, but they like that they hate your takes of AEW. This first one was sent in to CornyDriveThru at gmail.com from Israel Lutete. Hope I'm pronouncing that correctly.
What?
Lutete.
Lutit.
Israel Lutit?
Yes, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
That's what I said about Baby Doll, Little Teat. But what do you think of AEW using press releases for storylines and angles? And what did you think of Arn Anderson now managing Cody, which I guess he put that here because that was announced in a press release before in a promo or on TV or any other method?
Well, I'm in favor of press releases because that kind of releases to the press what you're fucking doing so that they can then, I've done many of them in my time for various events or whatever. And yes, the press releases should be your fucking story, because what are you going to do? Send out a notice saying, hey, and on our fake television program, this is what's happening. So yes, the press release should fit. And I haven't read all or actually any of their press releases. I know that that Arn is going to be managing Cody, and by the time we do the experience this coming week, I will be caught up on the world of AEW. But yeah, I'm just laughing at the question, because have we come so far that, well, if they do a press release, should they lie about it, or should they, do the angle? You should always, anything that the company does, promotes, story they tell, release they give, statement they make, should always be within the realm of, yes, this is real shit that we're doing here. And I don't really know any other way to do it.
And if the company's doing that, shouldn't the wrestlers do that as well?
Well, obviously, yes, but I mean, that horse has left the barn a long time ago with the fucking quality control and in pro wrestling. But
our next question, Jim, was sent in on Twitter using the hashtag CornyDriveThru from Brandon Mars. You've talked a lot about what AEW is doing wrong, so let's change gears. And I want to ask you, what is AEW doing right?
Okay, they've left Chris Jericho mostly alone because almost everything he's been involved with has made sense, been top notch, one of the better parts of the show, et cetera, as we crow about most every week. And the same thing for Cody, who actually has emerged as the new star of the program. We knew Chris Jericho was a star already, but Cody's emerged, I would think, wouldn't you say, as the new star of the program that hadn't been a star on television in this country before. Would you not say that?
I would. Kind of a benevolent Ric Flair.
Yeah. A benevolent Ric Flair, if you will. They have allowed MJF on their program every once in a while. I still don't know why this fucking guy doesn't have a 6-minute squash match just to piss people off on TV every week. And let him do his promo in seg 1 or hour 1. So he gives his delivery and then let him, come back out in hour 2 and just have a match to get some heat as a wrestler where he doesn't have to talk afterwards. He's going to be blown up or whatever, but have him just go over somebody, because I've seen him work. Obviously he knows what he's doing. He can fucking work. He can put a match together. It makes sense. His body language is incredible. He's every bit as good physically as he is verbally, but all they ever do is let him talk every couple of weeks. If you can give me 27 minutes of fucking every goddamn week on national television, give me the best new young performer that you have, signed up. But anyway, they've put MJF on television. What else have they done well or good in our estimation?
I think the heavyweight title picture, and obviously it sums up a couple of the guys you've already mentioned, but for the most part, I think that's been done well. I think, other than Marco,
well, that ties into Jericho.
That ties into Jericho and Cody, but includes Moxley, Darby Allin, who they've gotten over, and I think he has a lot of potential. Other than Marco Stunt being used in competitive matches as just another one of the wrestlers who can wrestle with anybody, I like the way the Jurassic Express has been used, considering Luchasaurus has been injured, and they've tried to get Jungle Boy over. I think that's been positive.
I would amend that. I will agree with that statement if we amend it to get Marco Stunt to fuck off my television permanently ever, and just had the Jurassic Express be Jungle Boy and Luchasaurus.
See, I think for the most part, I agree, but I don't mind Marco Stunt being like a little mascot. I have a problem with him being in the ring in long competitive matches where guys can't pin him, where guys can't beat him. Someone who my daughters can beat. But
why is this mascot? What purpose would that mascot serve?
Well, that's another question for another time.
Well, but no, what purpose would that mascot serve? And people say, well, he's a babyface, so the heels could beat him up and then the other guys could come back and get even. Well, here's the thing. If they're that goddamn in a dangerous situation and their opposing team is that dangerous, would you take basically a small child into that situation and put them in the line of fire in harm's way? The answer is no. So his very presence, if he gets beat up, I as a logical human being would say, well, he shouldn't have fucking been out there because he's a goddamn small child.
Other than that,
so I do not know what purpose that mascot would have, but the object that should be, or the person that should be getting the sympathy by getting beat up on is Jungle Boy, who can at some point believably make his own comebacks. But the fucking big brother to come to the rescue obviously should be Luchasaurus, and Stunt is an unnecessary distraction.
Beyond that, I've not been a fan of their tag team division, the way it's been booked. I think the women's division is a disaster at this point. We'll see if they're able to repair any of that. Maybe my biggest problem is just the formatting of the TV show. Because if you get into something, the next thing gets you out of it. At least for me. I know there are fans that just love everything they do. But I think
Well, besides that, the formatting of the television show based on it sounds like somebody who fucking used to goddamn, write television formats in his bedroom and all the tricks that he learned in his bedroom writing to himself, he's now using. Sometimes there's an entrance. Sometimes they'll start the fucking show with the introductions. Sometimes they start with fucking talk. Sometimes they start with action. Sometimes they put the main event on first. Sometimes it's just all over. The stuff in the commercial breaks, for fuck's sake. And somebody said, well, if you watch it on the internet, you can hear the sound of the things that they're saying and doing during the commercial break. Oh, great. It's only on TNT, national television, that we don't know what the fuck's going on. But if we're instead of the 600,000, apparently, maybe these days, give or take, watching on TNT, we could be one of the fucking 3,247 watching on the internet and hear these things. And some of them apparently ought to be on the television program.
Another positive I'll say, other than the worthless.
Oh, we were supposed to be positive.
That's right. Other than the worthless garbage match with Omega, I think Moxley has been a big positive there in terms of the aura he gives off. His promos have been good. He's had some short squash matches. They've built him up well.
Yeah, I can't disagree. I just wish, because he does have an old school feel as far as his attitude, and he's a tough guy and everything. I'm still long for the days of somebody like a real Terry Funk instead of what do they say on the internet now? A great value version of Terry Funk or whatever. But what disturbs me about him is I would like him, except he appears to be not only tolerant of, but full-throated endorsement on board with doing the fucking thumbtack garbage matches.
It's where he started. It's where he comes from.
Oh, well, it wasn't my week to watch him. I didn't study his entire biography. So, apparently what I sensed has come true. That's why I can't fully get into him, because I know that anything important or any one of the big matches or any one of his big pay-per-view matches, he's going to feel the need to, instead of working and having a wrestling match, have the fucking horse shit like you did with Omega, or the fucking gimmicks, or the thumbtacks, or the barbed wire, or the broken glass, or the fake glass, or whatever the fuck. And so I know then I'm automatically going to hate that match, so why am I getting interested in him to begin with?
On that topic, have you heard about Chris Cruz filing a complaint with the Maryland State Athletic Commission about that match?
I saw this on Twitter. I think from what I saw about the exchange on Twitter, Chris was very well going to call up and just see what the fuck. But then suddenly the reporting was, has filed a complaint and is testifying or whatever. No, I think what he said was, I'm going to call a fucking commission and see what they say about this horse shit. And suddenly it got to the point where he was apparently knocking on their doorstep with papers filed from Stephen P. New or whatever. Well, why not? Why not? Because if they're going to enforce rules, they ought to enforce them for all promotions. And it's well known they did it in Kentucky for a while until my old friend Mike Gunnerman put a stop to it, that promotions or that commissions will treat the big budget companies with more lenient than they will the fucking independents that run in that particular area more often. So, and Lord knows that show would have been so much better without that fucking garbage wrestling match on it. If they had actually gotten the ring and had a fucking match and had a fucking fight, brawl around ringside, as we mentioned, with a little juice instead of a goddamn stunt show stupid fest where they did all the fucking light versions of the garbage match greatest hits with the fucking, in some cases, phony goddamn. They were still hurting each other and slicing each other up with enough real stuff to do that, but then they used phony shit to make it even more phony on top of the phoniness that was already phoned in. Those matches are stupid. I hate them. Makes the whole business look ridiculous. So if Crispy can get the commission to fucking yank a knot in them for everybody, that would be great. Because if we would stop having to look at that shit, it would go away. These fucking, like, for example, just any outlaw mud show fuck that mutilates himself in front of small crowds of people that lives in rural Pennsylvania in his mother's basement. These tattooed up, fucking freakish looking people with shit hanging out of their nose and their ears and their fucking eyebrows to where they would set off alarms if they went through the goddamn metal detector at the airport. And the facial tattoos, how's that? That was a great life decision. How's that going to work out for you when you go to get a regular fucking job because you're not talented enough to be a wrestler? Those type of people are the type of people that do that type of matches. And that is what you're going to, that's the clientele that you're going to foster if you do those kind of matches on your big budget wrestling promotion. So don't do that shit.
All right, our next question sent in the.
But it was supposed to be what we liked.
It was supposed to be what we liked. We gave some examples.
Yes, Jericho, Cody, MJF, and isolated people such as the Luchasaurus and Jungle Boy and the guy in Private Party and a few of the other good athletes that they just, fucking cover up with their goddamn haphazard fucking ham-fisted booking.
Our next question was sent in the CornyDriveThru at gmail.com from Terry in Nashville. I know in the past you've had issues with Colt Cabana doing stupid comedy shit. You've said you made nice with him at NWA 70. How did you feel about his work when you were broadcasting with them? I guess it means the NWA. I think the Superman pin is stupid as fuck, but that overall, he seems to be taking his current role in the NWA about as serious as he is capable of.
Well, I agree. And that's why, it was the Ole Anderson principle. He was really, in a way, Colt Cabana was patient zero on the comedy wrestler bullshit. But his comedy wrestling was so in relation to what the fuck they're doing today, the young kids that have taken over from a veteran like Colt Cabana. His comedy was always, if you had to have it, at least it was almost inoffensive compared to now, where they've just dropped any pretense of any seriousness whatsoever. Colt has the size. He's a full-grown guy. He looks good physically. He's always been able to work. That's why I couldn't believe he just always chose to be silly. Because he can, as the guy mentioned, have straight matches, and he's really good at British World of Sport style. He's just always been silly, but now he was so much less silly than almost every silly fuck today that it's the Ole Anderson principle. But yeah, he can do it when he wants to. And the Superman, I didn't know that was coming. I just like, well, what the fuck? And thankfully, Joe Galley knew what it was called.
What is that? What is the
and
Superman
called
pin?
it?
What is it?
He knocked his opponent down flat of his back to where his opponent's legs flew up in the air, and then Cole just dove over the top and with his ankles hooked over the top of the guy's feet and did a push-up on the other side. And if you had the leg press strength of a goddamn, Tom Thumb, you could fucking kick out of that. But it wasn't completely offensive in the presentation of it. It was a little suspect.
Part of the problem now, and it doesn't really go into effect for Cabana as much because he's an older guy. He's like around my age. But you have a whole generation of people who grew up, and if they discovered wrestling, they think that comedy, and bad comedy, 99% of the time, is supposed to be a part of wrestling.
Yeah. That's basically what the problem is. And that's what we've got. And that's what's run every time that I hear a person in person at a comic convention or something. I used to watch wrestling, but I don't anymore. I used to like wrestling, but I don't anymore. I get emails. I get any kind of communication whatsoever. You see it in surveys. And as a matter of fact, and I did read, by the way, the book on roller derby that we're going to be discussing also upcoming on the Experience, because there's some parallels. But the point that I always hear is that we left wrestling because it got so fucking silly or it got so fucking phony. And I never you hear retroactively, you hear the made up version from the modern fans. Well, I wouldn't have watched that old shit, well, yeah, you kind of would, because everybody else was. You don't ever hear of any. I hated wrestling until it became a complete shit show and phony as fuck, and everybody trying to fucking tickle everybody else. Then I started watching it. You don't hear that, at least from normal fucking people or in any kind of numbers. You always hear the opposite. We used to love wrestling, watched it for years, and it got so fucking phony and silly and fake and stupid.
Reject that style of wrestling, and there's no faster way to get blackballed nowadays from the indies.
And that's, and there you go. And that's why you mentioned the wrestlers growing up and thinking all these things. The wrestlers have made the fans think it's okay to think of wrestling as silly and phony and fun because it's supposed to be that way. Because the fans think, well, if the wrestlers think that, then we should too. And the wrestlers are so fucking mentally goddamn fucked up and delusional that are allowed in the business these days that they think that. So they then make the fans think it's okay too. And I don't think this will ever happen at this point because there's nobody to take charge of the business again, like the territory promoters had charge of the business, control of the business, and just say, no. If you do not take this seriously, you will not be a professional wrestler, and we will weed this shit out. And over a period of years, people forget about shit, but I don't see it happening because even the goddamn people, all the people who knew how to do this right have all either died of old age, retired with all the money they made, or are still barely under contract to fucking Vince for one thing or another. So what we're left with, even the promoters now don't give it. They think this is right. They think it's supposed to be this way. So I don't see anybody correcting this over the immediate next generation or two. And by then, who knows, it may be too late.
Our next question is a popular topic. It was sent in by Joe in Toronto, Canada to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com. If you remember, Jim, the last time we discussed Lars Sullivan, he had been, I think, suspended and then he got injured. I think that's the order of things because they found a bunch of old tweets of his that were homophobic and various other phobics out there from a while ago. Well, this question was sent in. Dear Jim, longtime listener, last week it was discovered that WWE superstar Lars Sullivan may have participated in gay porn years before becoming a sports entertainer. With the internet not able to keep a secret anymore, what would have happened if something like this had happened in the territory days? Bill Watts has always had a reputation of saying, if you were knocked out in a bar fight, you would be fired. Would Watts have had a similar edict for this scenario?
Oh, I wonder, it might have depended whether he was pitching or catching. No, I have still yet to see this Lars Sullivan wrestle, by the way, because the only time anybody's been talking about him is when he's been out either, this guy was out injured, but we found these old horrible white supremacist things, or, I hesitate to call anybody anything anymore after, without checking into it for myself. And I haven't been that interested to check into it for myself with knowing how people hyperbolicize things on the internet. But it seems to me that he was pretty directly, and it shouldn't be homophobic, because phobic is like you're afraid of something. It should be like homo-hatic, because you're hating gay people instead of being scared of it, like they're going to come and find you and string you up. You just hate them because of what they do. But regardless, it does seem that he protested a bit too much about how bad he disliked the gay people. I just think he ought to quit doing things on camera and out in public until he just doesn't give a fuck, regardless. Because he seems to be getting in trouble. And he's had a lot of different viewpoints for such a young man, hasn't he? And he looks different. And one day he shaved his head, or he looks like the fucking college football player, or whatever the fuck. I don't know.
He may be confused.
He may be confused.
Our next question, it only goes uphill from here. Our next question was sent in to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from
wait a minute now. Well, I will say one more thing. What about if that had happened back in the territory? Well, Chris Colt did the gay porn, did he not?
I believe so.
For us, that's where he took his last name after Colt magazine. But you kind of expected that with Chris Colt. But all the guys were different back in those days. I don't think that the promoters would have liked any type of porn with a recognizable top wrestler in their territory, because that was not thought of in good fashion back in those days. So I don't think any porn would have been good. But well, Johnny Valentine used to just be very friendly in the shower, from what I've heard, but that doesn't mean he did it on tape.
What?
Well, every once in a while, Johnny Valentine, who had probably one of the most cruel senses of humor in the world, would take it a long way in the shower to fuck with fucking newcomers.
Oh, the JBL treatment.
Well, even worse.
Oh.
Sometimes he might go all the way through with it.
Oh, shit. Wow.
He was a very good ribber. Yeah.
There's another word for that that's not rib.
Yeah.
But, hey, when you were in Crockett Promotions in the 80s and
I don't think he held anybody down. I just think he found people that wouldn't resist.
Wow. I thought we were only going to go uphill from here, but somehow it's degenerated even further than the alley menage a trois at the beginning. Crockett Promotions in the 80s, Linda Dallas and Misty Blue come in there. Did anyone already know about them being in porn?
I'm trying to think now. What was the timeline? I don't know. Well, they
definitely did it before they were in there. In
wait a minute, they were in porn like people doing community access were in television. This I've seen it, and if there was another one, I may have seen parts of that one too. But I've done better fucking productions on my home video camcorder without editing, so it's not like they were in porn, and just tearing it up for vivid video, but. That may have it came out after the first time they'd come around through the territory, but probably before the last time. But their porn was as good as their matches. Nobody was surprised.
Seems like a really bad group of grifters. Like, hey, let's all break into porn together. Hey, this isn't working. Let's go to Kowalski school.
Well, I think they saved up money. Because Misty Blue's husband was the business manager, as I recall, and I think they saved up enough money to get Ron Jeremy to do a scene because they thought that would sell the video. But it did. Backstreet Alley Cats, for those of you interested, around at 1987-ish.
Well, there's another one with Linda Dallas, though. I think she did more than Misty Blue. Well,
I think she may have done some more, but this is where they were all together. I think Misty, Linda, Cat LaRue may have been in that. But I can tell you that Misty's husband, who was also on camera in certain parts of this extravaganza, could have benefited greatly from the advances in modern medicine. And I'm not even trying to do one of those. We don't do those ads on the program, but I'll tell you what, I would have had edit control over his performance if I was him and had any money in that. I would have taken myself right out of that.
Well, speaking of edit control, our next question sent into CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Mike Smith. Actually, let me redo that. From Mike in Richmond, Virginia.
I've heard his real name is Mike Smith. Can you shed any light on?
Will you stop it? Recently, I heard that Bill Goldberg wanted Bobby Eaton to break his streak in WCW. Do you think that this was Bill Goldberg paying homage to someone who trained him, or him stuck in an impossible situation? Would you let me know who won the pony? P.S. This is written kind of poorly. Would love to know who Jim would have booked to end the streak.
I've heard the story a couple of times, and yet Bill Goldberg in that era, what was it, 1999 or 2000, whenever, had pitched the idea or come up with the idea or even said, hey, this is what we ought to do. Have Bobby Eaton end it, because it's been a while since I've listened to the interview that he did about it. I know he did another one recently, or it was publicized recently, so I don't know what specific reasons that he gave in that one. But basically it was, hey, here's a fucking guy who's the best wrestler in the company, Everybody loves him. He's been a legend. They're doing nothing with him. And I think there was an element of, instead of all these fucking buzzards fighting over, all the top guys fighting over to see who gets to end my streak, why don't we should give it to a fucking guy that deserves it, was the sentiment. From a business standpoint, it made no sense whatsoever. And part of it may have been Goldberg had only been in the business, a year and a half at that point, and was hot without, I don't know if it push had come to shove and everybody had said, hey, that's a great idea, whether then he might not have gone, well, wait, should I do that? He may have gone along with it, but it should not. I mean, you know me, I love Bobby Eaton. And yes, he was one of the preeminent workers of the decade in that or any other company, but there's no way at that point in time, the way he was being presented and had been presented for some time, that he should have been the guy business-wise to end Goldberg's streak. As far as who should have, it also should have been a Hulk Hogan or Kevin Nash or, whatever the fuck. That's another thing. I think they ended it too soon. As Bobby Heenan said that night, right? He said, well, they've just killed the golden goose.
Plus, they started gimmicking the numbers when fans were actually getting into counting how many wins he had, which really fucked things up.
Well, yeah, that and that did, because it was like even obvious. How could he, what has he wrestled 16 times in the last week since he was on live television? They just got stupid with it. But ultimately, doing a job, no, they shouldn't have done it then, and they should have carefully planned for a new young heel that they were going to have under contract for the next 5 years that they could really fucking make, with Goldberg doing it in the right way at the right time. And, instead of all of the fucking high-priced talent trying to have double knockouts to see who got to beat the hot rookie, which is what was happening.
Our next question was sent in on Twitter using the hashtag CornyDriveThru from Rainmaker X. Longtime listener of the show, I recently heard you mention that Tom Pritchard started a wrestling school in Knoxville, Tennessee. After running from this dream for my entire life so far, I spoke with my wife, and she fully supports this. Any advice for me?
What the fuck? Good luck and God bless. Narrow it down a little bit. But what is my entire life? Are you 25 years old or 45? What do you look like physically? What are your athletic background and qualifications? How far away are you moving from? Have you looked in the mirror? I mentioned, there's not that many places that actually train properly anymore. And it's not old man Cornette saying this. Do you want to learn how to be a heart surgeon from a guy that has done heart surgery at the highest level around the country and the world and worked with all the other top surgeons in the top hospital programs and trained many of today's top surgeons? Or do you want to learn from a guy who's watched a lot of fucking medical shows on television and took a correspondence course? There are not that many veterans running wrestling training programs these days. So if you want to, if you are in the wrestling business already and think you're a trained pro, but you're stuck in the Midwest where everybody's seen you and you're not breaking out because you're not anything special, or the West Coast or Texas or whatever, you should look in the mirror. You should think about, if I really believe in myself and that I've got what it takes, I should move across the country, as Glenn Jacobs did. As we mentioned, that's why they started the program. He moved to Knoxville to learn how to wrestle in Smoky Mountain Wrestling to further his career. He was already a pro, but he needed to take the next step and be trained by a guy like Tom Pritchard personally, who has not only trained everybody, but who will teach you properly and not bullshit you. He's not going to take you into wrestling school and try to teach you a moonsault on the second fucking day of training, just like when you go to medical school, you don't pick up a scalpel, in third period and start cutting on people. He's going to teach you to be safe and how to do things the right way so you don't hurt yourself and cripple yourself or your opponent. And then you're going to learn psychology and et cetera. So training with veterans is obviously the way you want to go, instead of a guy who was trained by a guy who was once seen on television. But you have to hold up your end of the bargain as a wrestling school trainee, a prospective pro wrestler. Is this just something you want to learn how to do for fun? You realize you're never going to make a living at it because you're 5'4", or you're already 38 years old, or you're 162 pounds, or you're 345 pounds, or your athletic background consists of cheerleading in high school. Are you willing to get in the gym? Are you already in somewhat the shape of a professional athlete, or can you play one on television? Are you willing to get in the gym and improve that? Do you have the stamina and the cardio to be able to hang with guys at a professional level to learn how to do this as a business? If you want to do it for fun, then you're always best off to go to the closest wrestling school. Because if you're not looking to make a career, why uproot your fucking life? If you just want to get trained for fun, go to the closest wrestling school. If you want to do this seriously, go to the best wrestling school, but have a realistic look in the mirror at who you are and what you offer, and then look at the field and say, well, on some wrestling shows, anybody can be a professional. Don't look at the whole field. Now, if you look on the internet, in some cases, any fucking schlub can call themselves a professional wrestler, or just look at Twitter. Everybody's either a pro wrestler or has a podcast about it. But if you could look at classes like the OVW training class in 2005, or the Ring of Honor class of 2010-ish, or, even NXT now, the underneath guys, and you can say, I got a shot at hanging with those guys. Then you should move to the best school and get trained under a veteran as soon as you possibly can, and that's worth uprooting your life for.
What about promos in this day and age where guys are handed scripts and told what to say? How do you go about teaching promos? Do you bother trying to get them to learn how to speak naturally?
Well, I mean, one of the things we always did at wrestling school seminars in Ring of Honor, OVW, or wherever the case may be, any company, was we would give the guys opportunity to cut a 1-minute promo. Tell me who you are and why I should give a fuck that you're here, what you want to do, or why I should care about you. And they are all horrible because there are no interesting human beings in the world anymore. Under the age of 30, apparently. I don't know whether it's as they say on the news, they all text or they get on their phones or they play video games. They don't have human interaction. But no, you just do not need to be the fucking, the athlete and the wrestling technician. You need to have a personality. You need to have an engaging way of speaking and a personal magnetism that makes people want to look at you. My guy, they used to say Tony Charles was one of the most bland guys because all he did was the technical stuff and the scientific stuff. He was a fucking hoot backstage. Tony Charles was a fucking barrel of monkeys. All the guys had personality then because you were trapped with other weird, unusual, outrageous, and outgoing personalities in a cinder block locker room 7 nights a fucking week for 20 years. You learn to be entertaining or you get run off. But it helps to have a personality and have an entertaining way of saying things or doing things, or a different type of look. Don't just be bleh.
All right. Our next question, sent in the CornyDriveThru at gmail.com from Ryan. Have you ever been given the opportunity to work in Japan for Giant Baba or Antonio Inoki?
And the answer is Noki. I have not. You will remember Dr. Mike Lano got me booked in Japan one time for the Lucha group. Universal Wrestling, yeah, which go look up that story on the YouTube, the official Jim Cornette YouTube, or the Arcadian Vanguard channel, either one. But no, and don't get me wrong, that was a big honor for the boys in those days. Because if you were an American in the 70s and 80s and got a chance to go to Japan, not only was it big money, but it was, these big companies that didn't fuck around were saying, we have confidence in you that you're a major talent and a great worker, that you can hang here. And somehow that even though that is no longer the case, in most cases with people who go to Japan and wrestling companies in Japan, it is somehow still the mistaken apprehension. What's the word I'm searching for? It is somehow the misapprehension or whatever the fuck of today that now any schmo, just like in America, any schmo can work in Japan depending on who it's for. Some of these mark promotions even book their own dates and pay for their own tours in Japan to say that they went to Japan. But in those days, yes, it was an honor. It was big money, but they didn't use managers. Why would they have? And more importantly, why would I have wanted to go to Japan? I've never enjoyed traveling or flying. When I flew in the 80s, it was only domestically. We've talked about it. I never went anywhere internationally, but we never had time off. Once I got over in Mid-South and then to World Class and to Crockett Promotions and the NWA, I never had any time off from a big spot, a big money spot or a guaranteed contract until I started Smoky Mountain. And then I worked with the Japanese companies to bring some talent over, but I had no interest in going because, did I mention, it's a long fucking trip. And why would I go over as a manager? So, no, and that's the reason why the Midnight Express in the 80s never went. We were making $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 a week every week for long periods of time in this country. Why did we want to start from scratch? Because the Fantastics went to Japan. The first time, I think they got $2,000 a week apiece. Now, by the time that they finished, they built it up with Baba where they were getting like $5,000 or $6,000 a week apiece. But you got raises with successive tours. I didn't want to spend any time in Japan, and the boys didn't want to leave a job where they were making at least as much money in the United States as they would in Japan, if not more, and break up our spot. So it wasn't a thing, but I just wish that, because now you see the fans, they treat it like it's something hallowed. Well, so-and-so, this guy who works on an indie show somewhere, it is a mud show guy or a deathmatch guy or some fucking high spot goof, just sold out a show in Japan in front of 350 people in a barn somewhere over there. That the promoter probably booked their own tour and paid for 6 guys' flights so they could all say they went to Japan. It's not the same. Every show, just like over here, every show in Japan is not the Tokyo Dome, just like every show here is not WrestleMania. And it's ridiculous, this myth that going to Japan now has gotten with the fucking smart marks. Once again, I use the derogatory term, not fans, but smart marks on Twitter or smart marks in the fucking wrestling ring. Who's like, well, I've been to Japan. Fuck, you can ride a Greyhound bus anywhere and you can get a job washing dishes at a diner once you get there. That doesn't mean that you're being flown to fucking New York to cook at a 5-star restaurant. Have I made myself clear?
Did anyone ever approach the Express about doing a Japan tour?
Well, no, not in, I mean, only in, we'd see Wally Yamaguchi or, some of the Japanese photographers or whatever. Oh, you should come to Japan someday. But they knew also we're either the World Tag Champions or we're in a program with one of the top teams or we're whatever. It wasn't. And remember, we left before WCW started working with New Japan in 91, 92. So the only time if we'd have been under contract to WCW and they'd have tried to get me to go to goddamn Japan and not pay me extra money over the fucking guarantee that I was on to work in this country, that would have probably been the blow up there too. And because that's what they were doing to the guys. They were saying, oh, we're paying you guaranteed money, so go to fucking Japan and work too. That's what Flair got sideways with him about one time. He'd always done his own Japan deal and always made extra money over on top of what he made for Crockett or whatever the fuck. But I would have vetoed that in terms of, no, don't give me the extra money. I ain't going to fucking Japan. But the Midnight may have gone if we'd have lasted long enough.
On the topic of Flair, I wanted to talk to you about this on one of the recent episodes of John Arezzi's Pro Wrestling Spotlight Then and Now, where John and I review his original radio broadcasts from 30 years ago. So we're right now we're a few months behind. We're in like November 1989. And John got an interview from Sports Byline with Ric Flair that we were able to play on the show. It originally aired on his original show. And, it's the Ric Flair I kind of miss, the subdued Ric Flair. Yes, sir. No, sir. Just very kind and subdued. But you listen to him there. And again, I know it's November. It's before the blow up over Tully and Arn. Arn's money getting cut, Tully not being brought back, and everything with Herd. But he's right now head of the booking committee. It's right before the November Clash of Champions with Terry Funk versus Flair in the I Quit match. He's seemingly very happy with Turner Broadcasting. He says he wants to spend the rest of his career with the NWA. He wants to end up working for Turner Broadcasting, doing more things in sports. Was that just him putting on a nice face on a radio show, or was he really optimistic?
No, he was optimistic. At that point in time, the only thing that Turner Broadcasting had really shown was that they just picked the wrong people to run shit. They had chosen Herd, who didn't know anything, and he had chosen George Scott, and Flair was on board with George Scott. But then it didn't work out because Flair remembered George Scott from 1978 instead of 1988 or whatever. But then they'd had the committee for 2 months with Jim Ross and Eddie Gilbert and Kevin Sullivan and Jim Herd and Jim Barnett and Jody Hamilton, just everybody. And that was the reason why that Flair had basically demanded the book, because he thought, okay, it's getting worse with the committee because one guy needs to be in charge, and he felt it needed to be him. He'd finally realized they'd pretty much bought the company because he was in it, and he was the world champion, and he didn't want to see this get shot because everybody was concentrating at that time, not on Jim Herd, but we're owned by Ted Turner. It's Turner Broadcasting. It's a huge company. It's the basketball team. It's the networks. It's a blah, blah, blah. So when it was the summertime after the Bash pay-per-view, he demanded and got the book. And that was August, September, October, November, even into December, he was still optimistic. And this can work because all the numbers were going up, as it was detailed in the Midnight Express book. And we've talked about it in the deep dives. The TV ratings were going up drastically. The pay-per-view numbers were going up very well. The house show numbers weren't fucking skyrocketing, but that would stop the bleeding, right, with it in some places. And there was bright spots, and he liked the product. He liked what me and Kevin were doing. He liked, he was a big fan of Jim Ross as an announcer then. And I remember when we did the Clash in Columbia, we come back and Rick said, well, we've got our fucking McMahon and Ventura right there. He always wanted us to do the fucking shows. He liked the guys under contract on the roster, 90% of them. There was a few we were stuck with. So that was him being optimistic but excited. But I would say pretty much once that things started going well, December, January, and into February, that's when Herd started being more of a pain in the ass. It was all for the first time since they've owned the company for a year, and there's been upward movement in anything. And it was because of what Flair was doing and the changes he wanted to make, and not Herd. So Herd was more of a pain in his ass. And by February, that's when he wrote that letter and quit. He quit the booking committee, quit the booking job, period. He said, you have promised me full control, and you have not given me that. And I cannot take this constant interference. I quit. And then they just, it just went south from there. So at that period of time, yes, contemporaneously, Rick was loving everything. I was riding in the car with him to the TV tapings from Charlotte. And he was fucking over the moon about everything except Jim Herd. And that was a constant topic with everybody. So it wasn't like that was an unusual thing.
2 follow-ups to that before we get to our last question. One, at any point did Rick, when he was the booker, try to bridge the gap between Herd and Ricky Steamboat?
I do not know. I think I think that horse may have already left the barn at that point. Because
did Bonnie have a reputation already at that point with?
Yeah. Well, let's put it, nobody wanted to be negotiating with Bonnie, but that's apparently who was going to be doing the negotiating. So I think that was probably the biggest part of that.
And then with Tully and Arn, and we've talked about that in the past, obviously.
Oh, that was the final straw, because that was the next month after November, wasn't it? December?
The last night that Tully and Arn were supposed to work for the WWF was Survivor Series. Tully wasn't on that show because he had been suspended right before it. But
point is, that was about 2 weeks after the interview you were talking about where Flair was upbeat.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And Hurd made the decision a week or two after Survivor Series. So yeah, that from that point on, that was the biggest act of sabotage of the entire WCW era. Being there, seeing what was going on, seeing the numbers and which way they were going and for what. If we could have got the Horsemen back then actually that would have changed the path of history with Sting. Sting would not have torn his ACL because a different angle would have been being done in Corpus Christi, so he would have never got injured. And I'm not saying it would turn the whole goddamn thing around, but that was the closest they would get to turning the goddamn thing around for the next 6 years. And so Hurd vetoing Tully and Arn was the fucking straw that broke every camel's back.
One of the rumors mentioned on one of these old episodes of Pro Wrestling Spotlight that we review is that Tully and Arn were going to be one of the teams, a mystery team, in the Starrcade 89 Future Shock round robin tournament. And no, it was always going to be the Samoans and Doom and the Steiners and the Road Warriors.
Well, no, I can guarantee you that Ric Flair was not going to let Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard return to WCW on pay-per-view without letting everybody in the fucking world know they were going to be there. That would have been the stupidest thing in the world. For what would that surprise have taken place? I'm not saying that some yahoo in the periphery of this may have had that idea, and they were the ones that put the rumor out because they were the ones that they didn't do my great idea. But no, I guarantee you, Ric Flair, nor Jim Cornette, nor Kevin Sullivan would have allowed Tully Blanchard and Arn Anderson to return to WCW programming in an unadvertised fashion on pay-per-view.
The Clash of the Champions where Sting got hurt earlier the night, there's that fantastic promo. Terry Funk. It's awkward that Terry Funk's the guy doing it, considering he just had that feud with Ric Flair, and all of a sudden he's the babyface announcer.
Yeah.
And it's Flair, Arn, Ole, and Sting, and they fire Sting. And again, Flair is somewhat subdued until he finally starts slapping him. Ole really takes over. Was that always the intention, for Ole to really be the mouthpiece there in that angle?
Well, at that point, they knew the story they were going to tell and what they were going to say. I don't know that everything that was said was actually gone over until it came out in the ring. So it may have been, they may have said, Rick may have said, well, rock, Ole, why do, and then you really hit him with it because he knows that Ole can fucking turn it on and get some fucking hatred, right? And Ole was kind of the believable fucking heel in that scenario to turn everybody else, the apple that would rot the rest of the basket. So Ole, everybody knew would do a good job with that, but that's the thing. And back in those days, they were just going on the general principle of what they were going to argue about and what they were going to do. So sometimes things like that just came up in the goddamn interview. And Ole decided, well, I'll kick this thing up a notch. So who knows at that point what was pre-planned and what wasn't. You'd had to been sitting in the room with them when they probably spent 5 to 7 minutes talking about it.
So in terms of the power structure that night specifically, Jim Herd's the overall boss. Ric Flair's the head of the booking committee. You're on the booking committee. Kevin Sullivan's on the booking committee. You're on commentary. Sullivan has a match with Norman that night. I don't know what he's doing at that moment. Flair's in the ring. Who's actually running things in the back? Is there anyone at what is now known as the gorilla position? Who would have been
Jody Hamilton?
Jody Hamilton was there?
Jody Hamilton did Gorilla back in those days, which wasn't Gorilla because Gorilla Monsoon never worked for WCW. It was the fucking curtain. It's the curtain, right? And really, we just started having a fucking curtain just a few years before that. Sometimes it was just the archway or the hall. But yeah, Jody in those days was on headset because he was good at communicating things back and forth from the wrestlers to the truck to the whatever the fuck. But then also, Flair, when he wasn't working, could go and sit there and get on headset at any time, or Kevin could, or whatever the fuck. It just depended if somebody needed to know something. But most of the time, in those days, it was just Jody because you didn't have a lot of last minute instructions. If something went sideways, they dealt with it in the ring.
Well, Jim, our final question this week on the Drive-Thru was sent in via email to CornyDriveThru at gmail.com from Steve Van Etten. With all the talk on the 605 Superpodcast Observer Hall of Fame special about the candidacy of guys like Tully, Arn, JJ, and Ole, how would you feel about the original Four Horsemen getting in as a whole faction?
Well, yeah. Give me that one more time. I lost it around the far turn.
Well, if you remember, the discussion, it was in various segments, was around the fact that Ole Anderson's on the ballot next year. Currently on the ballot for the Wrestling Observer Hall of Fame is Tully and Arn as a team with JJ as the manager, which, all things considered, is a rather short period of time for someone to be on the Hall of Fame ballot. You could argue Tully, you could argue Arn, you could argue JJ, but putting them together as a unit.
Yes. Okay, I get. Yeah. So, well, it actually, yes, it should. If Ole Anderson goes in the Hall of Fame, it ought to be for his team with Gene. Really, and honestly, because I voted for the Andersons until it just became obvious that nobody else was going to because everybody's crazy and too young. Arn Anderson is a Hall of Famer on his own and for his time in the Horsemen, as is Tully Blanchard. But I didn't vote for them. I don't think I voted for them as a team because they were only a team for a fucking year and a half. So yeah, I get that point. If they're going to do something like that, put people in the Observer Hall of Fame like they're doing in some others in multiples, like they're part of a team and a single and a group or whatever, then yes, they ought to just go ahead and say the first incarnation of the Horsemen. Who would vote against that? I don't see how you could possibly vote against that.
Well, the problem, of course, would be Dave has not allowed people to be on the ballot more than once, so that would disqualify them because Flair is already in the Hall of Fame.
Well, but I thought Tully or Arn would be also singly.
No.
They're not?
No, they're not.
Well, fuck, that's fucked up anyway, then. He ought to put them on the Hall of Fame or on the ballot as individuals, for heaven's sake.
Who do you think you could make a stronger argument for? Arn Anderson or Dick Murdoch?
Oh, I thought you were going to say Arn or Tully.
Tully or Dick Murdoch? Because Dick Murdoch's kind of the line where he's not in. So are these guys better candidates than Dick Murdoch?
Well, here's the thing. Tully actually, when you think about it, would be a Hall of Famer as a single before Arn, because Tully had a singles career and a tag career with Gino before Arn got in the business. And then even though Arn's career went on longer in WCW, he was not used at the tippy top in a lot of that instance, whereas Tully's career ended shorter, but he was a main event guy before Arn got in the business. However, having said that, no, it's Dick Murdoch shouldn't be the cutoff guy. Dick Murdoch should be in the Hall of Fame too. And that's it's insane when you've got a guy who worked on top everywhere that he cared to work for 20 years, went to Japan back when it was a legitimately impressive feat, like 60 different tours, was one of the best in-ring workers in the business and could cut a hell of a promo and had a 25 or almost 30-year career. So I don't even see Dick Murdoch as the cutoff guy. I see him as another Wild Bull Curry, that how can this guy not be in a Wrestling Hall of Fame, especially with some of the other names that are in there.
All right. Well, with that, going old school right there as we wrap up the show. And as we wrap things up, want to remind you can follow Jim on Twitter at the Jim Cornette. You can follow me on Twitter at Great Brian Last. You can hear me on the 605 Super Podcast at 605pod.com, or available wherever it is that you find your favorite podcasts. Don't forget, the Jim Cornette Experience, a new episode debuts this Friday, and it's available wherever it is that you find your favorite podcast. All episodes of the Drive-Thru and the Experience, including clips and omnibus collections, are available right now on the official Jim Cornette YouTube channel, tinyurl.com/official corny YouTube, or just go to YouTube and search for Jim Cornette. It will be the very first thing that pops up. Also, we got to tell you about, it's open once again, Cornette's Collectibles at jimcornette.com. What is happening here in the new year at Cornette's Collectibles?
Well, it's always been open. I've just been ignoring you. But now I'm not ignoring you anymore. We're actually filling the orders. So, and a big year coming up, and I'm not going to go into detail now because I'm still laying low for the next month or two while I work on other projects. I don't want anybody to get jumpy right now, but you can order if you wish at jimcornette.com.
Once again, Cornette's Collectibles at jimcornette.com. And don't forget, the Drive-Thru is brought to you by the Law Office of Stephen P. New, 888-692-8084, or visit newlawoffice.com. But until Friday on The Experience, for Jim Cornette, I am the dry, great Brian Last. Tally-ho!